And those customers are no longer would see a rolling outage of 1 hour, and maybe the temperature drops by a couple of degrees. Now we're seeing outages where the homes chill down into the 40s and some into the 30s. And that is not a place for any of us want to be. Then, compounding that problem, as these homes are down into the 40-degree range, when it was time for ERCOT to begin to restore load in the system and began to contact these distribution providers and say, restore the load shed that we had ordered, they found out they couldn't do it very quickly. And the reason why is on a single feeder, when every home is chasing back up to 68 degrees, when they started at the 40-degree point, they began to lose transformers and breakers would trip. So they found that they had to go out to each individual home and turn an individual home on and wait for it to warm up before they could go to the next home. And it took a day and a half to bring all of the customers back. It wasn't until Friday that all the customers were back. So how do we prevent this in the future? The starting point is with generation. And I gotta start this next phase about the solutions by talking about really the fantastic work that the representatives did. The entire legislature was in session. They immediately turned to this issue. Naturally, they turned to this issue and began to hone in on what are the key problems that need to be resolved. And they're very focused on making sure that they hit the major areas and not get drifted off into the minutia that we can all get stuck in. But they focused on what are the tools that ERCOT needs to have. One of the major things they did was they gave us the right to ask generators, not ask, to force generators to weatherize, to be ready for the next event. Now I'm going to say something controversial to you though. The news press, they said generators had been through 2011 and they did nothing, and they did not prepare themselves. And I'm going to tell you that that is not true. They did prepare. We have the facts to show that they did prepare for 2011. They prepared for the wrong storm. As I said before, this storm was 10 degrees colder across all areas of Texas, 10 degrees colder than 2011. And the units were not ready for that type of cold. So the legislature gave us the ability through the Public Utility Commission to require weatherization by all the generators. They gave the ability to the Railroad Commission to require weatherization for gas facilities. And they gave both of them the ability to levy $1 million fines per day per occurrence if they fail to do so. A significant penalty authority, which didn't exist before. So the generators have really moved forward on weatherizing their facilities, independent of the Public Utility Commission, because the Utility Commission rule wasn't really completed until mid-November. But the generators spent tens of millions of dollars. I know Vistra here in the North Texas area spent about $50 million. I know that the ones down in the south, I know they're also in the tens of millions of dollars. They've spoken to me about that. They began immediately to do what they needed to do and did not wait on the commission to get done. That commission rule has been completed. They have just today completed attestations to us, signed by their CEOs, that state whether they are ready for this winter or not. And I'm sure there'll be some that aren't ready, but my understanding is the vast majority of them have stated that they are ready for this winter. They have done what they need to do. We're going to go out and inspect them. We've been given that authority given by the legislature. We will inspect them during the month of December, from December 2nd, tomorrow. That's right, tomorrow. December 2nd through December 29th. We will be in the field visiting over 300 generating units. And of those 300 units, they comprise 85% of the lost megawatt hours. We're focusing on those that created the most problems for us. And if they fail, we will report them to the PUC, and the PUC can levy those fines. So they know they're on the hook. They know we're going to be coming, and we've got an extraordinarily strong team coming to review all these facilities. We will do all that work during the month of December, from the 2nd to the 29th. Early in January, we'll be able to supply a report, we can give that to the reporters, we can give it to all of you that states how the generators did, what we found when we got there, how many failed, how many had to do additional work to get ready. So we'll have that report toward the end of this month, perhaps at the first of next month, because we'll be wrapping up those inspections on the 29th. Now, there's three major pieces to the problem though. Generators are a big part of it, right? That's really kind of where things started. I should say four pieces if I even move to gas, because there's some gas issues that we have to deal with as well. But let me start with just electric. Generators are the starter. Let me go to the other end now. On the distribution side of the world, the distribution companies, they have to get prepared for the potential if we need to have load shedding. And they have to make sure that the plans are ready for keeping customers, if we do go on the load shift, that so the customers don't have to be off more than an hour at a time. That's their plan, that's their goal. Now all that depends again on how well the generators do, but they have to have their plans ready, and one of the major pressures on them is that there's so many more companies now coming asking for critical level service. And as more companies ask for critical level service, water, natural gas, as ask for that service, there are fewer and fewer lines that the distribution companies can use in the event of a load shed scenario. So the distribution companies are working on their end, the electric companies, the generation companies are working on their end, gas I know is working on their stuff, and in the middle, ERCOT has to be better at communicating. Our head of communications is here. He's been working for the last 7 months, almost 6 months. Been working the last 6 months on improving our communication, making sure that we have channels that go all the way through every one of the providers. Remember, we don't own the distribution companies, but we have to make sure we're communicating through them and through their retail providers, so that the information that gets to the customer is not a different set of information from each one of those channels. We have to make sure that we're in alignment. They understand what we're saying, we understand what they're saying. That's what Chris has been working on. Improving our capability to ramp up as well, because we have a 5-member communication staff, Chris?
Yes.
And we have to ramp up because 5 people can't talk to all the legislators, tell them what's going on, and then all of you as well. So we have to be able to ramp up. He's got plans for how we can get there in one of these types of events. So I don't want to overlook communications. That's a huge piece of the solution. That's all I wanted to deliver to you, and what I'd love for you to do now is begin asking only tough questions.
Okay, Dave Leaf, a couple questions about accountability. Number one, there is no way you didn't know who is losing electricity. And as a customer who's lost $1,000 like many other people, the most frustrating thing was not knowing when I get power and having bad information when I get power and no accountability. My second thing is on the accountability, you talk about levying fines. I'd very much prefer the fines to go to the customers in a form of a rebate. Yeah, the state can get half, but we're the guys who suffered more than Texas. That's it.
Good, thank you. Let me start with the first part, accountability. I agree. Part of the reason why I'm here is to be accountable to you, right? I will stand before you and have you ask me that question. How do we be more accountable? Now, my entire board was fired. The CEO was fired that I replaced. All of the public utility commissioners have been forced to resign. So at least at that level, there's accountability, okay? The second piece of what you're talking about is making sure that we don't give you different messages. I was just talking about that. We have to get better at that. There's a lot of, this kind of finger pointing going on during this event. We have to all be pointing in the same direction. Not pointing at someone, but pointing in the same direction, going the same way. That's what my commitment to you is, and that's what his commitment is to you as well, to fix that problem. The last bit on where those monies go, I do not touch that at all, right? That's for somebody else to decide. I do know that the Public Utility Commission doesn't keep the money either. They somehow let it go into the state fund, and then the state figures, let a representative talk about how they figure out how to use that money. But that's really not an area for me. But thank you for the question. Yes, sir.
Good evening, Ted Rudman from the Colony, also with CoServe, who I actually think did a pretty good job of managing through this for us. But I'd like your comments on the gas supply issue. There's been several articles written about loopholes in the legislation that's passed where if the gas suppliers don't declare themselves as critical infrastructure, then they no longer have to weatherize. And like you said, without a supply, the generation isn't there, and then you get into distribution challenges. I also agree that, you know, we all had monetary damages to our homes. I did as well. And along with that, homeowners insurance, I just got my renewal. I don't know about everybody else, but went up about $1,000, even though many of us probably didn't submit claims, and that's not gonna go away anytime soon. So I would also agree that if there are fines, maybe they don't go to the homeowners, but something should be done to equalize it, because the homeowners are gonna be left holding the bill for the next 10 years.
Ted, what was that, Ted?
Yeah.
Thank you, Ted. Again, on that last issue, that's.
Yeah, I know it's not.
So, your first, remind me again, your first issue.
The gas supply loophole.
Oh, thank you. So, the gas issue, many of you may have heard I've been very vocal about it. I've been very concerned. Unfortunately, I found myself in the newspaper more than I like to, but I've been very concerned about it. But I have very good news for you. Just yesterday, the Railroad Commission met to address that rule, and they made some significant changes there. One of the changes they made was to say that the larger gas producers, the ones that actually produce most of the volume, would not be eligible for that $150 out. That category is only eligible for, is that not true?
It's true, yes.
Okay, that category is only eligible for, my understanding, for the smaller producers, and then they still have to go through a process to prove that they're not somehow critical to our network. So that's a great improvement over what we had. They've also required all of those larger gas facilities to register as critical facilities with their local distribution provider. So the bottom line to you is that what I've always been quoted saying is that I'm very hopeful that they'll make the right choices to focus on reliability. And I believe that's what they've done. Thank you for your question. Yes?
I want to start out with saying some positive things that happened last winter. The one thing, how many of you guys got out and helped your neighbors? How many of you got out of your house and helped somebody? I can tell you that people got out and helped people. My husband works for a church. The church let everybody off. Obviously, they couldn't come into work, but they work from home. They said, if you can get out and help every neighbor you can help. The sad thing that we saw is we had Mercy Chef come in to our church and help provide meals we have a large church, for thousands of people who had no electricity or water. The devastating part was that we accidentally found out, which we need to do better as a community, to find out the most vulnerable. There was an apartment building, there were several, with elderly people that were stuck on the second and third floor and could not get down. No water, no electricity, and no one there to help them. So it was wonderful to see the community get together and come in and help. So that was, you wanted some stories. It was quite a crazy week for a lot of people, but I did see so much, and you know, it made me proud to be a Texan, because the Texans got out and they really did help their neighbors. Here's a couple of questions. I have been researching this. I happened to call CoServe the other day to talk, and the lady on the other end says, I have no hope that this is not going to happen again this winter. Stock up, get some wood for the fireplace. So that is something. The other thing that I have a question is, now everybody on the board, do they live in Texas? That was a shock to us. That you have people on the board who live in other states who don't truly represent Texas. My other question was $150, and that is true, and that's, I wanted to hear you talk about that, and you did, so thank you.
Good, thank you. And thank you for the stories. It's important for all of us to hear. So you remember I was in New York for a few years working for the ICE over there, and that's when the Harvey happened in Texas. And I was so proud of what Texans did for each other, because they didn't wait for the federal government to swoop in and save all of us. They pulled out what they call the Cajun Navy. They pulled out their little boats. They went around. They pulled people off of porches and off of roofs. And I was so proud, because every time one of those New Yorkers would come up to me, I'd say, that's how you do one of these. Okay? You do it with people helping people. Let me transition a little bit on that though. because this summer, we began operating much more conservatively than we ever have before, meaning we were bringing on more reserves than we had before. And I was telling our folks that if we see a problem coming, we need to communicate it to people through a conservation alert, because we want every Texan to be able to help each other, to make those choices, just simple choices, to move their power consumption off of peak times. And it was difficult doing that because all of us had PTSD, and when I know many folks, when they saw that alert, they got concerned and thought we were going down the same path. But it was not a situation of us getting into trouble. It was a situation of us staying out of trouble. By communicating to Texans what they can do to help each other and to help themselves to keep the grid sound. I hope to use conservation alerts again. I don't know when conservation became a bad word. It never should have. But I hope to use it again when we need it, and I want to use it early. Well before we get into trouble, because I want you to know that you have an opportunity to help all of us, help your neighbors to keep the grid sound. So I wanted to get back to that point. You mentioned 150, you also mentioned,
Does everybody live in the state?
oh, everybody lives in the state. So, I'm gonna make Chris nervous back here, because I'm gonna disagree with everybody that's back in the room, right?
It doesn't matter.
Why? Legislature, of course, they did what they did, and I'm fine with what they did, right? Our board is fantastic. The new board we have is fantastic. But I would argue to you that the woman who was the chair of our board for 2 weeks from Minnesota, it would have been nice to be able to find out how Minnesotans handle this. And so when we say just Texas, we eliminate the possibility of learning from other areas. Or we don't eliminate it, but we reduce it, right? And I was concerned about that. I didn't feel as strongly about needing to have an all-Texas board. I'm thrilled to have one, but I didn't feel as strongly as this audience did about the need to have one. And the legislature weighed in very quickly and said, we're not gonna do that anymore. And we've got a new board seated, and I swear they are fantastic. I'm really pleased with the people that are on that, and they are all from Texas. But I wouldn't have clapped at that, because I believe that diversity is what makes us all better. And we lost some. Yes.
I'm Gary. The lady in front of me did a nice job of presenting some of the stuff that was relating to the board. The question I have now is, when will that be a permanent board with permanent people instead of interims? So that we know not only in 2022, but in 2023 that things are going smoothly.
So you'd be happy to hear. So we already have our board seated. It hasn't been fully filled out. There are 8 new board members that need to come on. We've got, I think two are about to be announced. So we got 5 now, and about 2 more I think are about to be announced. But we have, the board is fully functional now, even with those 5 members. And then I'm a member non-voting, and we've got another member, the chair of the PUC is non-voting. And then we got a 3rd member of what's called OPUC, which is a voting member, and they represent residential customers. So there's a residential representative on that board. And as I said, 8 independents are there. So the board's seated, hopefully you'll take some comfort from that, and they're fantastic. They're an aggressive group that most of them are CEOs of companies, and I think we're gonna do great with them. So, thank you.
I wanted to thank Representative Shaheen, you, Mr. Jones, Mayor Cheney for putting this on. It's great to be able to actually come up and ask y'all some questions. I kind of a direct question for you, and that was in regards to critical infrastructure and also generating units specifically for natural gas. What I'd like to know is that has ERCOT received from the Railroad Commission a list of not only critical infrastructure when it comes to generating units, but in addition to secondary sources that support those generating units to ensure that as you shed load, that you're not cutting generating units and in turn decreasing our capacity to support.
Excellent, thank you. What was your name again?
Joshua Murray.
Joshua, thank you. So Joshua, what I was saying a moment ago is that the Railroad Commission just passed a rule. And, oh, there you go. And what the new rule requires is that those large producers of natural gas have to sign up as critical infrastructure. So they do have to sign up on those transmission distribution companies. Now, beyond those large producers, we still have some work to do to identify of the smaller producers, how many of them are also critical to the system. That takes a lot longer to do that. I'm on a mapping committee, Joshua, that is putting together maps of transmission distribution lines, where they connect with gas facilities, where the gas facilities feed back into a gas generation facility for electricity. And we're still in the process of getting that done. The legislature has asked us to have that done by September of this next year. So we'll not be ready for this winter. But I think the Railroad Commission has done a great job of moving that ball forward.
And on the main generating units, you do have a list of those organizations and companies that supply those services, support them, so they can stay online as well?
Yes, we know what the major pipes are, we know what the major companies are serving it. We don't know all of this gas supply that goes ahead of that, because they're disaggregated. It's not like the same pipe company owns the gas. So we gotta figure out where all that gas is coming from. That's why the RRC Railroad Commission focused on the largest producers, requiring them to weatherize and requiring them to establish themselves as critical loads. So part of it's done, but we're not done at all. There's a lot more work that needs to be done to get that piece of it right, that fuel supply coming in. I don't know that a lot of the generation in the state though is putting in firm fuel backup, meaning they've got tanks on sites, they've got alternate fuels in case their natural gas runs out so that they can operate up to 7 days. And so I know a lot of the generators are taking that extra precaution in case gas does go out again. Thank you, John. Yes, sir.
Hello, I'm Mark Rudy.
Phil?
Mark.
Oh, Mark.
Mark. Yeah, I live in Fairview. I have colonization, had it for about 20 years, and I'm very happy with it. We had a little damage at our house, but not as nearly as bad as most people. I'm here to ask about natural gas generators. So of all the ones that you mentioned that you had problems with, you didn't mention any of natural gas, and I'm not saying there wasn't, but I'm really asking this question because I want to be informed and educated. From what I understand, we are like the Saudi Arabia of natural gas here in Texas. It seems to me that most, if not all, of our generators should be running natural gas, because again, if I'm wrong, correct me, but in today's technology, they put almost zero emissions. And to that point, does our renewables, such as wind, or do you have backups for them in case they go down? And do you have backups for your backups? That is to say, can you put out 125% of the need today if you need it? So if the need was, whatever that kilowatt is on an average, and you needed 125%, you have backups that could do that. So my first question is about natural gas. Would you elaborate on it? Tell us why we aren't producing more natural gas generators, since it would benefit the state. And it's puts out virtually no emissions, and it's just a great resource. Seems like to me that should be a main focus moving forward. Thank you.
Good, thank you, great question. Huge answer though, great question.
I figured it was going to be.
Big answer, all right.
I'm sorry, I'm sure it's very complex and not as simple as I put it.
Well, and so I gotta I'm gonna winnow down the answer, but if you wanna talk afterwards, we can spend more time on it too. But I'm gonna get the answer kind of into a concise.
That's fine.
Framework. So the starting point, my understanding is that Saudi Arabia calls themselves the Texas of the Middle East. Right? So that's the way that works. We do have a lot of natural gas in the state. We have a lot of dry gas, what they call it up here in the northern part of the state. But where the value is in the wet gas, the gas that has other volatile liquids that they can split off into different processes. And most of that is Permian Basin and down further south. So that's where the big gas fields are. The natural gas generators, and I'm sorry that I didn't communicate clearly enough, but earlier, natural gas generators were different. Electricity generators that are fueled by natural gas.
Okay.
I'll say it that way. Electricity generators fueled by natural gas were the biggest category of units that we lost. Now that makes sense, they're also the biggest category of units that we have. The largest amount of capacity comes from gas generation. So we rely significantly on gas generation in our state. And when gas began to come offline, and it did, let me say this again for the gas folks in the room, there you are. It did come offline before electricity, and it made some generators come offline, but then that loop back with our electricity coming off forced the gas supply to get worse.
Okay.
So the two are kind of combining each other. But gas began to come offline about Friday. Our event happened on Monday morning at 1 a.m. and then it lasted through Friday of that week. So the expansion of your question then goes to why aren't we using more gas? We are using a lot. Okay, so it's a big piece of our fleet. We do have a very diverse fleet. We have nuclear, we have coal, we have gas, we have solar, we have wind. Wind, our wind portfolio, not ours, not ERCOT's, but the ERCOT market. The wind portfolio is larger than any two other states. That's how big it is in Texas, 35,000 megawatts. No two states can equal what we have. Bigger than most countries, I think, and we do like to think of ourselves as a country, right? And I think we're third or fourth internationally, but that's only because we're behind the United States, which includes our numbers, right? So we are significant in terms of wind production and wind generation capacity. We have some solar coming on, but we're going to see a lot more of it. Before the summer, we had 3,000 megawatts of solar. After the summer, we had 9,000 megawatts of solar. By next summer, we'll have over 12 grand. By the summer after that, we'll be over 20,000 megawatts of solar. Now, why is that? Part of that's because the federal government puts a lot of money into solar. That's okay. I've always said we like when we pay $1 in taxes, if they send us 75 cents back, we're okay with that. Right? And so they're sending a lot of money, they're spending a lot of money on solar and wind resources, but solar is really what's moving fast in the state. Now, why is it moving fast? I told you it's a long answer. This is the short version.
Okay.
Why is it moving fast in the state? The reason why: number one, great business climate. Number two, we are really the only electricity ISO, the only grid in the nation that is growing. Everyone else is flat to declining. Our state is growing from an electricity standpoint at 2% a year. From an electricity standpoint, that's a phenomenal number. And so they see it as a good business climate, great growing state. Number three, we have purposely lowered the barriers to entry for everybody. Every generator has a very low barrier to entry here in our state, which is much different from others. They require a lot of transmission work to be done. They require a lot of approvals. Ours is very low because we want generation coming to our state. So those factors are driving solar in an incredible way. And we're going to need to prepare for that. And as you said, what we have to do, you were talking about 125%. What we have to do is we have to make sure that as more solar comes on, and I don't want to slow them down a bit. I like them coming to the state because that brings low prices to all of us as consumers. But as they come into the state, we have to be prepared. We have to have the right types of generators, dispatchable generation, because we know every night during the summer, about 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock, those things are going to stop working. They do it every night without fail. And we have to be able to replace all of that power, 20,000 megawatts, if we get that in a year and a half. 20,000 megawatts we have to replace in 2 hours. So we have to have the right tools in place to do that. By that we mean we have to make sure that we send the right incentives for the types of generation we need to replace that generation that is lost when solar goes off. So we are doing that. We're doing that work with the PUC. They're doing a significant market design work. And part of that is focused on how do we get those tools in place so that we're ready, so we can send the right incentives. What will fill those gaps? Number one, gas generation. Number two, load that can move offline really quickly. An example is Bitcoin. Y'all have heard Bitcoin's coming to Texas. They can move offline really quickly and support us during that 2-hour time frame. And then number three, batteries. Batteries are coming. I just came from a battery tour Lindsay, you were there with me, we just came from Vaventura. If you ever go on a Vaventura, it's an extremely boring place, all right? It's just batteries, right? But seeing the development in batteries is pretty extraordinary, because those are technologies that can fill that 2-hour gap that we need filled. Then they go away and we finish off replacing it with other generation that takes a little bit longer to get up and online. So that's how I think we'll solve that last problem, but we can spend more time on this.
That's fine.
That's just a short version, but
I think there was some confusion. What I was referring to was not just generators that produce gas for your house. I was referring to electricity that ran off gas, and maybe that's where maybe my confusion in your earlier comments.
yeah, because I was
My
talking about
understanding is that
electricity,
my understanding is that gas generators have their own electrical, they have their own pumps there that even if electricity goes down, they should still be able to run. But maybe that's what I've been told locally from my gas supplier.
with some of it, right, but not with all of it.
Okay,
So
thank you.
like local systems, like the gas at your home, they will have that type of facility, but the large pipes may not. Mr. Moore?
Hello, I'm Bill Moore. Good discussion so far. I have a couple of questions, 3 or 4 maybe. But first is, what I picked up from your presentation today was the level of surprise that the generating industry had when this cold front rolled through here. And I saw from some of your early numbers that 42% of our capacity the day the storm rolled in was coming from wind. Who wasn't thinking about that? I mean, how did those kind of things surprise our operators of the system? You don't have to answer that one. Just,
But I would, but go ahead, ask your next question.
And I think the other thing that sort of struck me, what we've experienced in this country over the last 2 years with infectious disease, and we had a gas outage in the east caused by computer hacking type of things. And when we had this ice storm here, I think what it demonstrated to everybody in the country is how thin the veneer of civilization is. And you know, with the power down 4 days, we couldn't get meat to the stores. We couldn't get truck drivers on the road. All kinds of things happened that you don't really realize is this thin veneer of civilization we've got. And we've got a population living in cities. There's no backup for life support when that veneer breaks down. So the bigger question I have, we're talking about weather and weather-related events, but I think perhaps a larger threat is the fact that someone sitting at a computer keyboard somewhere in the world can shut down some of your generating or all your generating capacity and even damage it irreparably just by messing with your controls. And to me, that's a bigger threat, and that I would hate for that to be the next surprise. So how do we get the industry thinking in turn a little bit longer down the road? Quit looking at their feet about what's going on now and start looking at the horizon about, well, what is it that we need for this country, and cover all of these things. So I'd hate for us to feel like we've done great just by worrying about putting some insulation and heaters on some equipment around the state when we've got other things as big or bigger that we ought to also be thinking about. So, and then the last thing is, I know Texas, we're isolated, we got our own grid, and we like it that way, and it's had some benefits in the past and so forth. But I wonder, when does that wisdom turn to hubris? I mean, it seems to me like we should be re-looking at, is it the right thing to be going it alone all the time? I think that comes to mind is the kind of interruptible generators that you want to bring into the country. Maybe we could get more of those in our area if they could sell during the off-peak times outside of the Texas grid. So, there is some logic and probably wisdom there somewhere. I don't know the answers, I'm just kind of asking questions. So, how do we cover a little bit more future looking as well as this cold related event? Now, answer whatever question you want out of that.
Excellent, well, if any of y'all plan to go home at 9, this will take you till 9 o'clock. There's a lot there, Bill, so let me kind of unpack the pieces and go through each one. But it allows me, what you said allows me to talk to you about something that is very important to me that I haven't discussed yet, so thank you for your question. So to start, operators, how are they surprised? And first of all, I don't know about 42% of.
That was your numbers.
Wind capacity, I don't think that was going on that night, but let's talk about all that. So we have to plan our system for next 5 minutes, for next hour, for next 5 hours, for next day, for next week, for next month, for next year, for next 10 years. We plan all the way out, okay? Now we're just not surprised by what happens, but we know that sometimes there's a risk that we've minimized that risk. We never expected to have that cold of a temperature, right? Nobody in the generation community expected that. They were all planning for 2011, not for what we experienced. On, say, the wind side, we forecast the wind 5 minutes away, we forecast an hour away, we forecast it 3 hours away, we forecast it days away, and we do that with pretty good accuracy. We know about when the fronts are coming through. We may be off by 30 minutes or an hour sometimes, but we make sure that we have the reserves to cover if those forecasts are off. You know, if a wind front or a rain front comes through Dallas, we may be off by 30 minutes, and that may be material to us, but we make sure that we have the reserves to cover ourselves. We are very good at forecasting wind, we're extraordinarily good at forecasting solar, and that's the key to making those technologies work, is knowing where they're going. Because if you know where they're going, you can prepare for it and get other reserves back up to support you. And 2, cybersecurity. That's what we call it. The issue about some bad actors typing on a computer somewhere trying to bring our system down. I will never say that we are completely ready for something like that. I don't think you can be, because as long as we try to stay ahead of them, they are just as quickly trying to get back ahead of us. But I will tell you that throughout our nation, the electricity grid has done more work than possibly any other area of the nation. We are governed by a very deep set of rules for reliability and how we protect our systems. We're audited up on that every year, I believe it's every year we have an audit on that. And they'll go through and we'll do these penetration tests and we'll see if people can break into our systems. And we keep our systems separated in ways that we have walls between them and we can watch for any type of penetration or cross flow of information between them. We do an extraordinary amount of work on that. And you brought up gas. Gas, I'm gonna throw our gas folks under the bus again. Gas is behind us. Okay, gas has been behind us. They don't have as organized of a structure as we do in the electric industry. I hope that you get there soon. And I'll call on you, you can come up and tell me I'm wrong in a minute if you like, but gas is behind us, and I want them to catch up, and that example, I think the pipeline was called Colonial, it was actually a liquids, it wasn't a natural gas pipeline, but Colonial, was that their name? Colonial, yeah, it was an example of, they did not have, as we reviewed what happened to them, we were astonished at what they had failed to do to protect themselves. And in fact, that wasn't even an operational issue. To be clear, the Colonial was an issue of, it really came down to dollars and cents. Because what happened on Colonial was they couldn't figure out who was taking their product, because all their metering didn't work, and they didn't just want to let that continue to happen and then try to settle up later. So they shut the pipeline down whether they could fix that problem. It was more on the commercial side, not the operational side, but still shut down a major pipeline for several days. I feel very good about where we are. I will never say that we cannot be penetrated, but we work at it all the time. That's something that is my focus. When people like in this audience ask me, what does it keep you up at night? It's that one issue. How do we make sure we're ahead of it? How do we stay ahead of it? Thank you. Third question, I'm sorry. Oh, he had 4, I gotta get two more. Third question.
I think you covered most of it.
There was a real good one. So let me extemporize that, because there was something you said that was important to me. one of the places that I think that ERCOT, and when I say ERCOT now, I mean us, it's a nonprofit group. ERCOT, where we failed, is we did not fight for reliability for the last 20 years. We let the market kind of push us around, right? And when the market pushes around, they say, you don't need that reliability thing that costs too much, let's just go with that. And we let that happen. And there are areas today, like having on-site fuels, that we lost that over 10 years ago, and now we're gonna get that back. There's an acronym that I've used for over 20 years, which is reliable, affordable, clean electricity. RACE. Reliable, affordable, clean electricity. But for the last 20 years, it's been spelled CARE, clean, affordable, reliable electricity. Moving that R back up front is extremely important to me. And that costs money. That means some of your bills may go up, very tiny amount, but your bills may go up. But that's what we need to do to continue to attract businesses and continue to attract people to come to the state and continue, for that matter, to attract Californians to come here, because I know they're coming. But we have to make sure we have reliability. Sorry, Bill, you
I'm sorry, the last
thing.
piece that you didn't answer was the piece about interoperability with the other surroundings.
Oh, yeah, that was the big one, yeah. Yeah, I didn't intentionally box that, but that's the big one. So, where's the mayor of Frisco? He's what?
He had to step out.
He stepped out. Anybody from the city council? Okay, let me ask you. So, who do you think could set laws for the residents of Frisco better? City of Frisco or the city of Plain? Exactly. I mean, it's simple answer. City of Frisco. You can determine what your residents need. That's why you're elected, for that purpose. Texans have always felt like it was important to keep the electricity market, the design of our electricity function within the state of Texas. Because we felt like we could give better rules, better laws to meet the needs of Texas. A great example of that is the way the legislature jumped in on this issue immediately and began to work to set these new rules in place. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, I doubt anybody them are in the room, but I don't want to know. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission just completed the report of the winter event. They gave us 48 recommendations. We've already been working on those 48 recommendations since early in the summer, because we had the leadership of the legislature, we had the leadership of the Public Utility Commission, and we owned this issue ourselves. We didn't have to wait on them to tell us what we need to do. That's the value of it. Now, there's some value about having some exchange with other states, being able to move power back and forth. But I'll tell you what one of the findings was of the FERC when the report came out. And the finding was that they doubted that the power coming from the east could have made it to Texas. Because MISO, which is to our east, it's called Mid-Continent Independence System Operator. MISO to our east, and SPP, Southwest Power Pool, which is just to our north, Oklahoma. Both of them were in trouble at the same time we were. As the power came from the east, got soaked up by MISO first, and then made it to SPP, and they doubted it ever would have been made all the way to Texas. Thank you. Yes?
Good evening. Thank you for providing this opportunity. My name is Sherrie Salas. 3 leaks, busted pull pipes. One of those leaks was major damage. Okay, so when you were speaking, you had mentioned that there are going to be inspections for the providers going forward. Woo-hoo. My question is more for Mr. Patterson and Mr. Shaheen and or you. I'm assuming there's going to be a monetary cost attached to keeping that, and I just want to know if that's going to be indefinitely and if our state can commit to that just being an assumed, yes, it's going to happen going forward, or if in 5 years when we get a little bit cozier about learning how to manage new weather crazy, we kind of get a little lazy on that. So that's one question. And then the other thing, you're speaking about this gentleman, it sounds like you're trying to create like a secondary contingency informative option for residents. I can't stress how important that move is, because it was also an issue that we couldn't help ourselves.
Right.
Like some of us that are handier than average, sure, you know, like we could, but for example, just winterizing your pool pump, it basically is just undoing all of your pool pump, but residents were so worried about doing that because they don't know their pool, but at that point, you're gambling of losing the entire pump and making the situation worse. So I'd like to really stress how important, I think that would be ideal to kind of just have like stakeholders being informative to create info that can be pushed out when something like this does happen, solely so we can help ourselves. And then, and a part of that is like, if you use FISD, for example, their maintenance people were so intuitive. They went through and asked the ISD to close the district early on so they can go shut down all of our pipes. Our district did phenomenal. They had like 6 leaks, whereas other districts across the state, you know, kids were out of school for weeks, you know, so that's kind of like, if this is gonna happen. Okay, and then the other thing is, so my husband and I own 2 properties, 2 condos in Galveston Island. And a year ago, before the February storm, you know, our insurance for our management company comes back and it's like 20% higher, and I'm inquired why. I'm like, what the heck? And they informed me that because of all the natural disasters, because we went through like the hurricane alphabet like twice or whatever, like there's so many anomalies that the insurance coast to coast, you know, they just hiked everything up just because there's so much going on. And what I'd like to send home to Mr. Patterson and Mr. Shaheen is, while this will go into my insurance company as an act of nature, it's an act of nature that could have been prevented. So the gentleman that was sitting right here earlier, he mentioned that this is an issue that's going to be long-reaching for me as a homeowner. And I just want to make sure that that is something that my leaders don't lose sight of, because it is going to last forever. It's important that this doesn't happen because of stuff like that.
Thank you very much. Your name again?
Sherrie Salas.
Sherrie, thank you. So Sherrie, to start with, and I love these multiple questions. This is cool. I just got to test my memory. So the first part of it was really a question for the legislators, and I'd like them to be able to answer that, about whether you believe that this will be a flash in the pan and will not inspect folks in the future, or do you think this will be something that we will do from here forward?
Yeah, the idea is to continue this process. So for the audits that have been discussed, there's actually 2 different types of audits. There's the audits that we talked about with the 300 units that experienced the failures. There's that. There's also these emergency operation plans, or these disaster recovery plans that I talked about, being more stringent on the audits of those plans as well, because something's going to happen again, whether it's, you know, a winter event or whatever. So really, there's been funding increases for both of those, and the plan is to continue that, because the blessing that we have is this economic growth in the state of Texas isn't going to stop. It's going to continue. So there's going to be more and more units, whatever type of unit it ends up being, whether it's solar, wind, gas, whatever, they're all going to require some type of inspection. So those numbers are just going to continue to grow. It's kind of like education, just by the fact that our enrollment grows every year, we're constantly increasing the funding for education. We're going to be doing the same thing with this as well.
Thank you.
I just want to add a little bit to that. So one of the other big changes is that the entities that regulate the different aspects of the energy industry, meaning all the way from natural gas all the way to electricity, have been pretty disconnected in the past. And one of the changes that we made was bringing everything kind of under the Texas Department of Emergency Management, not from a regulatory standpoint, but from a disaster recovery standpoint, to making sure that, you know, everybody's talking to everybody else, that everybody's on the same page. I know that wasn't your question. He answered your
No, but
question.
I'm glad you said that, because they have kind of always behaved as a dysfunctional family, so it sounds like you're working on it. That's good to hear that you're.
That's the other thing. And then if I could, just for a moment, I want to also address another question that was answered earlier, because I've got some hot sports opinions about that. There was a question about why we don't have more natural gas electricity generation, electricity generation from natural gas in the state of Texas. And the answer to that is because of the federal government subsidies. And Mr. Jones talked about that to a certain degree. But we don't have a true free market in the state of Texas. All the generators are private companies that are operating in their own best financial interest. And so the fact is that when you have wind generation that is so heavily subsidized in the state of Texas, to the point where their break-even point is negative 2.3 cents per kilowatt hour, that the thermal generators, the reliable dispatchable generators that come on when you press the button, those generators cannot compete. So, you know, if I'm a generator and I'm trying to sell power for 3 cents, and I'm competing with someone selling power for negative 2.3 cents, I can't compete with that. Moreover, if I'm a thermal generator and I say I will be on the next day, I will provide this amount of resources to the grid the next day, and if I don't, I will go buy power on the grid and I will supplement what I cannot provide, which is why so many of the generators lost millions and millions of dollars during the winter storm. The wind guys don't have to do that. The wind guys are there if they're there, and if they're not, they're not. And they don't get penalized in the same manner that the thermal generators do. So in the last 5 years in Texas, we have seen hardly zero growth, basically, of any thermal generators in the state of Texas. It's all been renewable, predominantly wind over the last 2 decades in the state of Texas, which doesn't blow when we need it, which is typically 3 to 7 p.m. in the summertime, and also so heavily subsidized that the other guys can't compete. So the answer to why we don't have more gas generation in Texas is because the federal government is so heavily subsidizing the competition that they can't compete. And so I wanted to just address that as well. Thank you.
Oh, and one last thing, just as a little humor, I think ERCOT should send Shark Bites the company a nice Christmas gift.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Erica Cordier, and I actually live in Denton County, and I live in, a lot of you have very expensive homes. You had an incredible amount of damage to your homes. I live in a very poor Hispanic community, a 60-year-old mobile home community on the lake. We got wind chill factors during this event that were devastating, and by day 3, the dogs went feral. People just set their dogs loose. There are generators. They're mostly construction people. They have generators that run on gas. Moved to propane. Propane sold out. And we had 5 propane heaters, 2 cabins that are raised. Our groceries were frozen to the floor because of the wind chill factors. A little different environment than the residential people experience. And we have a homeless community out there. We had to arrange for people to bring food and water to them because, and I'm a federal contractor, I can't even give them a bottle of water, okay, because of immigration issues. And it was the hardest situation out there. And a lot of people, when the electricity came back on, their aged appliances didn't come back on. FEMA came out, you know, with all these promises. I still have a FEMA application on a solar system that I built from scratch that saved us during this event by, you know, running our small appliances and being able to charge batteries and things like that. And they're still not paying out. And I know that's a federal issue, and I know everybody wants to pass the buck on that, but there's a point where the state of Texas is gonna have to push back on that because it affects the people that it hurt the most. And Mr. Moore's comment about joining the major grid, I want you to know that I have 35 certifications in cybersecurity. I am not an expert in cybersecurity. Nobody is an expert in cybersecurity. And when we connect to the grid, and I want to stay separate, I support staying separate and independent, we get into what we call squirrel theory. Bad state actors? No, when we join the major national grid, we're talking about disenfranchised bad state actors who are essentially like squirrels building nests around the country, gathering nuts for a rainy day where they could rain terror on our grid, essentially. And I can only explain it as squirrel theory because that's the best way to explain it. And crypto mining in Rockdale, could we really handle that load? I mean, really, it's frightening to hear that, you know, not just one, you know, BitDeer, but also Riot Blockchain, and that's a lot of consumption. And I know you talk about them being able to shut down in a heartbeat. I'd like to know how they really are going to be able to get back. Thank you so much.
Good, thank you. So we'll let the cryptocurrency comment kind of stand on its own. The comment about those underprivileged folks, the folks that were really impacted by it, I know that, and that bothers me. most of us, you know, it was an inconvenience. For the legislators, made it a major inconvenience. I know some of you were out for many months, of your homes. But this is life or death for these people. And when they're losing appliances, it's something they can't replace. One of the things Sherrie asked a question, I didn't finish the answer to that, and there you are, Sherrie, fits into this question as well. And it goes back to our communications. If we do better on communications, if we can tell you that you're going to be out for multiple hours or days, as opposed to everyone expecting what they've always expected in the past, that, you know, you may be out for an hour and you come back, so you get your heaters going, but if you know you're gonna be out for days, you're gonna take a different set of actions. And that's where we have to get better, we have to improve. We have to make sure that you're hearing one story. And if you're gonna be out for days, that you hear that story and you know to go seek shelter somewhere. Or to go find a family member who you can go to, because you know that your propane is not gonna last for 4 or 5 days. So that's our commitment to you to improve on that. Thank you for your comments.
But you shut down Little Elm's storm shelter, which would have provided, you know, a warming center, and the only warming center was like Louisville, the mall at Louisville. And so if you were shutting down some critical centers, to conserve energy, and it didn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, so first of all, we don't have those plans. Those are the distribution companies that plan what to shut down. But if you're aware of a warming center, certainly the city of Frisco, if they're aware of warming centers, they need to communicate that to the local distribution provider, which is Encore, and make sure Encore knows that that should be a critical facility and should not be shut down in a warm storm. And that's part of what you as a community have to do to get ready for this type of thing, is to make sure that you're not surprised by something like that you've gotten those warming centers signed up on these critical networks and they are protected in the future. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Jim Coffey, and you've already touched on the three questions that I had, but I kind of want you to expound on them a little bit more. And forgive my ignorance, so I'm not gonna, this is a very complex topic, very complex subject, and I consider myself very ignorant on that, so I'm counting on you to expound on these three things. How much of a factor, we've kind of touched on it briefly, is the growth that's occurring in Texas and the production of electricity? Being born and raised in Texas, for years you heard about how fast Flyer Mound is growing, that area. Now it's this area over here, Collin County, that kind of thing. And then the attraction of business. So how much of a factor is just the simple supply and demand have in this kind of situation, number one? Number two, we got extremely lucky this summer. I feel like we didn't have a hot summer at all.
We did.
In comparatively to previous summers, like 1980. So that was one of my biggest fears coming out of this, and hearing for, I don't know, again, how long you're gonna know it, but for several summers, there were those notices that we were gonna have to cut back and that kind of thing. So I was fully expecting it to be worse this summer, but we didn't really have a hot summer. And then you kind of already touched on the third thing I kind of want you to expound on is, other than cybersecurity, what's your biggest fear and what keeps you awake at night?
So other than that, I'll address that one as well. So let me go back to the beginning. You had a very simple one at the beginning, which was, help me again with.
How much of a factor is the growth, the demand, and their lack of supply in this problem?
So really very little to do with the winter, if you're asking about the winter. You know, preparing for our growth is a significant part of what we deal with every day. But for the winter, it was not. So the winter, normally we have a much lower load. In the summer, we hit a peak of around almost 75,000 megawatts.
That's why it was so shocking to me, because of the problems we've had in the summer in the past. We never had a problem in the winter.
That's right. And winter's always like 64 grand. So we have a lot of excess generation laying around. But in this event, it wasn't about having the generation, it was keeping the generation on. That was what happened to us. So when you lose 50,000 out of that 84, remember I told you 84 before?
Right.
You lose 50,000 out of 84, you're in trouble. You're in big trouble. But that has to do with weatherization, not with the growth.
So transfer that to the summer. If we
Transfer that to
I was
summer.
more worried.
And now we get complex, okay? Because our amount of excess generation is exploding. We've got a lot of excess generation, but it's all coming in solar and wind. And so it gets more complex then, because we have to make sure, well, once the sun goes down, are we prepared? If the wind stops blowing, are we prepared? Do we have the alternate resources that Representative Patterson talked about? Do we have the alternate resources available to us to turn to? So that becomes a very complex part of this entire equation. How do we do that? How do we make sure that those generators that we're going to need remain available to us? Don't leave the system because they don't have the money to stay in business, but remain available to us when we need it. And that's what we're working on today with the Public Utility Commission, is setting up those changes to make sure that happens. Okay?
Is there any fear in you or these guys that if we ever had another summer like 1980, that we don't have enough or we don't have the way to protect us from that kind of situation? Because we have not had a
So
summer.
you asked what keeps me awake at night. It is making sure that ERCOT is prepared for that future. Making sure that ERCOT has the resources that it needs in the future to meet the needs of every Texan. And let me tell you, we had a very light summer. Like, it's been 10 years since we had something that light. But we still had, in June, a significant issue. That's when we called for conservation. Why? Because we had a lot of generators that broke in June. Why'd they break? We don't know. It could have been because of the winter, could be any number of issues, but a lot of them broke at the same time in early June. And throughout this summer that was so cool, wind abandoned us. Our wind numbers are the lowest we've seen in over 10 years. So when we turn to our wind resources, they often weren't there, which left us in a very tight situation, especially during those June days. It was still throughout that week of June. At the same time, we had very low or very high generation outages. We had very low wind output. So that is what keeps me awake, is making sure that we have the other tools available to us to supply our grid. And it's a difficult, when we don't have direct control, when we're trying to engage a market, to get the market, private investors to come here and bring us what we need, it's a complex problem to solve. We have to figure out, well, what will incent them? How much money do they need? What type of products will attract the right type of attribute? For example, if we need something that moves quick, we need to figure out a product that pays for quick moving stuff. If we need something that's gonna hold a duration of 2 or 3 days, there's probably not batteries right now. We need to pay for that duration capability. So we gotta figure out how to create these tools. And earlier speaker talked about Bitcoin, and I forgot it all altogether, so let me address that. I'm pro-Bitcoin. I'm not an investor, so, but I'm too risk averse to be an investor in Bitcoin. For that same reason I missed out on Tesla, right? But Bitcoin is different from other data centers, because other data centers have to stay up, because we're all using them, we're tapping into them, whether it's websites or information for a company or anything else, they have to stay up and they have to stay running. Bitcoin does not. Bitcoin's processing these Bitcoins, and as soon as the price of electricity gets slightly higher than what they're willing to pay for it, they shut off. And right now, that number is somewhere around $100. So as Representative Patterson said earlier, a lot of these solar and wind can produce power down to negative power rates. Negative $23 per megawatt hour. He used cents, which is 2.3 cents. Same thing. So if they can go negative, these Bitcoins see that as a great opportunity. They can get paid to use power. And that's why they're coming to the state. But that's not necessarily bad, because negative power is not healthy for the market at all. And so then being able to soak up some of that negative power, and as soon as it goes to a positive number, positive $100, they shut off and they're gone. And they stay off until the price drops again. So I think it's really a valuable potential resource for us. Just weird. Yes?
Hi, my name is Jackie Wagon. Thank you for being here. I read into this article, I was just reading like a week ago, and there was a statement here that just caught my attention, and I'd just like to read it. Texans will pay for the efforts of last February's cold snap for decades due to come as the state oil and gas regulator approved a plan for natural gas utilities to recover $3.4 billion in debt incurred during the storm. The regulator, the Railroad Commission, is allowing utilities to issue bonds to cover debt. As a result, taxpayers could see their bills rise over the next 30 years. So not only did Texas regulators fail to hold the local energy utilities and frackers accountable for failing to protect their infrastructure from the weather after decades of warnings, that's a long sentence, they are happily signing a plan to allow them to punish consumers for their own incompetence. Can you expand on that, please?
Yes, thank you. So there's so much wrong with that, okay? I think I understand where they're going, but there's the seeds of truth, but there's so many errors. First of all, it has nothing to do with the Railroad Commission. It has nothing to do with natural gas. I'll let you two off on this one, right? So I'm not gonna hit natural gas on this one. It has to do with the electricity market. The legislature gave the ability to some companies to securitize those monies that weren't paid. Remember, several companies went out of business and they owed money to other companies that had bought fuel and had operated during the storm. And those folks should be paid. And remember, ERCOT is nonprofit, so we don't have any money. We can't give money away to these folks. We take the money that's owed from customers and we send it to these generators. And what happened was when they said, we're not paying you, we told generators, we're not paying you. So a lot of generators lost billions of dollars and still waiting to be paid. So what the legislature did was gave the ability for some securitization to recover some of those costs and to pass it to those generators, and those costs can be uplifted and will be uplifted over about 30 years to customers. Now, how much does it mean to you though? Let's put it in real dollars and cents. First of all, my chief financial officer tells me never to say this in public, all right? But he said he thought it was about 60 to 70 cents a month for 30 years. It's still a lot of money, but it's not, we're not talking about a big piece of your bill. We're talking about a very small piece of your bill. But that was passed by the legislature to help keep the market going so these generators didn't go out of business. The ones that perform like they should didn't go out of business, could recoup the cost of them providing service. That was part of it. So pieces of it are correct. A lot of it is wrong.
Yeah, thank you.
But
For that 7 cents, to be honest.
don't repeat that. Don't, oh, this is being videotaped, isn't it? Okay, good.
I'm telling public, there's conservation at home.
Yeah, you could address that.
Offset this. $10,000 totally restored. That type of money for anybody, you can cut a couple lights off, turn on 12 TVs and see. All of it.
Well, you leave.
I had one of them.
Yeah, with 3 channels. I remember that too. Exactly. I'm not trying to minimize it. That is a cost for all consumers for 30 years. But it was a decision that the legislature made because they believed that it was necessary to preserve our electricity market. So that companies that had done the right thing did not have to leave the business because they owe their gas suppliers. They have to pay them and they're still waiting on the money from us. So that was a lot of the logic behind it. And would either of you like to speak to that issue? Okay, excellent. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm Ryan Pope. I've got a quick question regarding inspections. I wanted to ask you if you could expand on how the inspection process is gonna work. Are you gonna test and how it's gonna be tested? You can't really put a whole generator inside of like a temperature chamber and bring that down to 0 degrees F, so, that's all.
And it's much simpler than that. So we know what the techniques that are necessary to weatherize those facilities. We know that they have to have what's called heat tracing on the pipes. I came from the generation side, I got a chance to do a lot of this. But heat tracing is just a simple resistive heat element that runs the length of a pipe. And they cover that with insulation and it keeps the pipe warm. So we'll go check for that, make sure all that's working and ready. We're gonna check to make sure that they built enclosures around their critical equipment. That needs to be done as well. Basically windbreaks to stop the wind chill from freezing these pipes. They build these windbreaks. And we'll make sure that all of the equipment that needs to be insulated and protected is insulated and protected. In addition, what the PUC did in their rule is they said, not only do you have to meet these standards, but you also have to address everything that went wrong during this last winter storm. Which means that would be easy for us, then we can go in and we can say, well, we know which elements were the problem, and we can audit that and say, what have you done for this, what have you done for that? There's no actual running of the unit in a cold weather environment. It is testing to see they have the protections in place. That's what we're focused on.
Quick follow-up, is there any like standard or like any sort of storm, you know, this next storm was 25% worse than the storm in February, or is there like a certain benchmark that we were trying to hit that, to make sure that our grid can withstand?
So I'll give you another four-letter acronym. NERC is the North American Electric Reliability Corporation. They work for the FERC that I mentioned earlier. NERC controls us on all reliability things. We have to respond to them. NERC just passed a set of weatherization standards that was just passed by the FERC. I don't know when it's in the numbers, but it's out there. In addition, after 2011, we developed in Texas a set of weatherization standards, what had to be accomplished. And where the commission went this year is you have to meet, they said you have to meet those standards, plus you have to fix everything that was broken, but they're not through yet. Because the commission knows we need to develop our own standard that reflects as close as possible a 2021 type event. They didn't have time to do that. And so they have a phase 2 that'll be coming in after this year. But as I said, they've got a long way with requiring everyone to fix everything that broke this last time around and to meet those old standards. Thank you. Yes?
Dave Leach again.
Yeah,
that's right. Anyway, I got a question about the summer of '80, because I didn't get a straight answer. Have you modeled the summer of '80, if we have another event like that, with the growth we've had today? Are we prepared?
So I haven't gone back to summer of '80. I don't know if it's been longer.
Couple of months straight of 100+ degrees weather.
Yeah, I go back to 2011.
No, I want the summer of '80. Have you modeled it? It's a simple question. Have you modeled the great heat storm yet?
2011 answer. Okay.
Okay.
That's why. So we've gone back to the summer of 2011, which I thought was worse than '80.
Not even close. Not even close. It's embarrassingly
Who votes
different.
for 2011? 2011 over here. Who votes for 80?
Ask the old people. We were there. We remember it. Seriously, I'm very serious. Summer of '80 was bad, really bad.
Yeah.
The other storm was insignificant compared to that. Are we ready for what have you modeled? Let's put it this way. What have you modeled? What's the worst case scenario that we are prepared for with a huge summer heat wave?
So let me answer it this way. So we do model 2011 summer. Okay. We do stress that. Now, going into this summer, we have 30% extra generation. We haven't had that in years. In 2019, our percentage of excess generation was 8%. That is an embarrassingly low number. Across the entire nation, they have requirements that it has to be 15%, no less than 15%. We don't have that requirement in Texas. We don't set a minimum number that we force people to build and buy to. But they do up in the rest of the country, and that's 15%. When I was in New York, it was 18%. It was glorious being an ISO CEO in New York because we had so much excess generation capable. 8% back in 2019. Today it's 30%. We've got
That's
a
a
lot of
number.
excess generation. What's that?
If you haven't modeled it, I'm okay. I'm just telling you haven't modeled it. I'm interested, what can we take? Can you quantify, you know, are we ready for that, what we talked about 2011? Are we ready for that today?
Okay, I'll tell you this. We could take 1980 and shove it up against 2011, stack the two on top of each other, and 30% is enough to cover both.
Thank you. Great, all right, thank you.
Hi, Chris, make sure that's true. Oh, yes, sir.
Howdy, my name is Bob Holmes. I'm a new resident here in the area. I've come from Bryan, Texas. Somebody turn this off.
Well, no, I'm just, I got bad ears.
Okay, I'm a new resident here. I came here from Bryan, Texas. We were a municipally owned utility company in Bryan. And I have to say I've been a little bit bedazzled and confused by dealing with CoServe and Bryan. You had one company, that's who you went to, and that was the end of it. But my question dealt with two things. You talked about the stick that we're gonna use on these producers to make sure they're in compliance. Are there any carrots out there available for them to make these accommodations?
No, we decided, we in the state, decided not to pay generators for the work they're doing. It's a very sore point from the generator side. They're investing in weatherization, they're investing, as I said, tens of millions of dollars. They'd like some way to recover that. Neither the legislature or the PUC or ERCOT has developed anything to recover that. So basically I would say it's a stick painted orange. It's not a carrot, it's just a stick.
Gotcha. Also, I'm an Aggie. I was wondering if you have utilized Texas AgriLife any to work with citizens regarding weatherization and preparations that can be made at home to prepare for these type of events and to conserve energy. I'm also curious if ERCOT has been involved in the planning of this explosive growth that we've had in Texas, requiring things like buried underground utility lines so that we're not at the mercy of a winter storm to take lines down and have to get linemen out and repair them. Is ERCOT involved in making recommendations on those type of things?
Thank you for the question. The answer to both of those is no. So ERCOT's responsibilities really extend to the connection, to the edge of the connection between the transmission and distribution side. Distribution side, those companies are who you should talk to about those issues. So they will have some programs about how to, they have some programs, some incentive packages for customers to improve their insulation and to weatherize their homes. They've got those packages. So I would go and I would talk to those distribution companies. They're also the ones that would be responsible for underground or overhead.
So the R in ERCOT relates to producing power. How it's put out is to these local entities that buy it.
So there are, actually a good question. I see there's confusion. So let me kind of walk through, I'll give you a very serious answer to this. ERCOT is in the middle. Primary responsibility for reliability is to make sure that we balance generation and load. It's also to plan for the future, to building out transmission 10 and 15 years away. Now, we don't build it, but we plan it, and we tell those builders, those transmission owners to go build it. We don't own transmission distribution, we don't own generation. We're actually a fairly small company. It's about 800 people, nonprofit, as I said. So we're in the planning function and we're in the balancing function. We also have some other functions that we help out on retail, customer choice, and those kind of things. So when you have questions about your distribution provider, why is my power out, I don't know, 3 times a month? Call them, talk to them about that. You should raise that concern because they have responsibilities. They are judged on that by the Public Utility Commission. And if they have a feeder that is out more than X number of times in a year, they get penalized for that. So talk to them about your experience. If you think they should put your line underground, talk to them about that. If you want some assistance in weatherization, they've got programs for that. They'd be encore in this area. So that's who you need to speak with. But we don't own those facilities. And so our reliability part is, as I said, on planning for the future and on keeping it in balance.
Thank you. Thank you.
Pleasure. Yes.
Thank you. I want to thank my representatives, Shaheen and Patterson, for putting this together. It is so great. Thank you for being here tonight. My name is Ginni. listening somewhat carefully, and I just wanna understand, like a prior person that was wondering why, we're not using gas since Texas is gas, and you sort of answered him. I wanna make sure I understand the answer. And it is that the windmills and solar panels are renewable energy, and they produce energy for us for less money. Is that correct so far?
Yes, there's some details.
Okay, now, my understanding is when they wear out, we have to bury them somewhere. Okay, it's like we have a graveyard or something. Another point is that, the reason that it costs less for these things to make energy for us is because the federal government subsidizes it and making it cheaper. Now, the last time I checked, the government didn't have a job. It's us taxpayers paying that money. People forget that. I don't. And another thing, federal money always has a hitch to it. I don't like being under control. And my thought is, this is Texas. Why are we permitting the federal government to come in and control our energy? I mean, we hired you to make sure this doesn't happen. Yes, I'm angry. I don't like being without energy. I pay my bills and I do my job, and ERCOT should be doing their job. They didn't do it. They didn't do it. And my thought is, we all know the federal government that's in power right now, it's all about green energy. The reality is it ends up costing us. I'm sorry, I'm just a person with common sense. Nothing is free. When the feds dole out money, that means more money and more money, and I'm tired of being taxed. I think we Texans know how to do it better. Private always knows how to do it better. And it's cheaper. We know how to burn gas and oil better than anyone. And that's what we should be doing. We should not have had this catastrophe. And that's what I want to say. Not only that, why should we be buying windmills and solar panels? They might not all be made from China. Another thing, we have people in there making decisions. You just said that the reason the windmills froze up is because we had this sleet rain. Well, hey, we pay you guys to know that stuff. So we shouldn't have had them in the first place. And that's what I have to say. And you get paid, do your job. This better never happen again.
Thank you. The one in there, she's asked me to explain better about natural gas and its role in our market, so I'll do that. And I probably, you've heard of an anger coach. I think I should probably have you standing right here beside me to help me get angry on the right things. But what's happened really across the nation is a significant level of subsidies for wind and solar. And those subsidies, as the representative has already stated, they have greatly affected our market. Now, when you ask about the use of natural gas, we use a lot of natural gas, okay? It's a great resource for us. Over 60% of our generation capacity is natural gas related. But that natural gas has financial pressures right now. Because when the federal government's sending $23, now let me do this math for you again. Remember, our market price of power averages about $25 to $30 in a year's time, excluding this year. $25 to $30 average for per megawatt hour of production. Federal government sends $21 to the wind and solar providers, mainly wind. Solar has a different program, but mainly to wind. So you can see that it's a significant amount of money for what our alternatives are. That kind of financial pressure is putting the large natural gas facilities at financial risk. we have to make sure, we ERCOT, have to make sure that we have programs in place that will help to retain those generators, because we'll need them at least for another 20 years, if not more, before we can get to a transition to where it's batteries and renewable kind of things. It's gonna be at least 20 years, and so we need to retain that generation for at least that long.
Her point though.
But it's not renewable.
Our tax dollars.
It's
though,
not renewable.
Subsidizing wind. Why shouldn't they at least fairly subsidize gas and everything else?
Hey Brad, I'll take that, Brad. So just to kind of go on that, and I appreciate, Gene, I appreciate you being here, and if you saw those of us on the House floor, we have that same level of anger on the House floor, trying to add amendments to bills, trying to address this situation at the state level. But I will tell you that the outrage needs to go to your federal representatives, because they're the ones that are in control of these subsidies. The state of ERCOT does not determine which generation assets come into Texas. We don't pass a law in Texas saying you have to be natural gas or you have to be coal. That is all market driven. Which companies, or the companies that invest in our state, they invest based on what is the most economical for them to invest in terms of generation assets. So it's been years since we've had a natural gas generator built in the state of Texas. And the reason for that is because they can't compete. We've grown by 1.5 million people, our economy continues to grow. Now you can say that it's your money and that, that you don't approve of that. I don't either. But I'm not the one putting that program forward. And if I'm a CEO of a company, I'm going to invest in what makes my shareholders the most money. And right now, the most reliable form of power, you can't make money on it as easily as you can something that's so highly subsidized, where the government is paying you dollars and dollars and dollars hand over fist to invest in this other one. So unless we want to go in and be heavy-handed and dictate certain generation assets in the state of Texas, which comes with its own cost. Every other market out there, other than Texas, has what's called a capacity market. They pay generators just to be available, just to build in their state and to be available. We don't do that in Texas. Their costs are higher. Texas has the lowest cost market in the country, and has the most stable grid in the country, and has, because of the way that we've operated. But we're on a dangerous path because of all the subsidies. I filed a bill in 2019 that didn't make it, where I warned about this situation. I predicted a situation similar to this, not the winter. I never dreamed that this would happen in winter, but in the summer. And it was mentioned in 2019, our operating reserve demand curve was only at 8%. And we had issues in 2019. The market exploded in 2019. The average price for power was 20 cents. In August of 2019, that was a major problem as a direct result of what the federal government is doing to us with these subsidies. So I wanted to kind of just address that real quick, because it's the federal representatives that are doing that. It's not ERCOT doing that. We've got one of the best in the entire industry here, trying to fix what happened in the winter. He wasn't here in the winter storm. He wasn't leading ERCOT during the winter storm. He's the Mr. Fix-It. He's the guy coming in to fix those things.
Jared, I have a question.
Sorry, I have a question. Thank you, Jared. Thank you, Jared, and thank you.
Before you get started, can I make one correction? Chris just slipped up here and said, every time I say Encore, add Net Municipal and CoServe. All right? So it's actually those three areas that serve those residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Jared, and thank you for allowing questions. And you may have already said this, and maybe you can expand on the question a little bit more. My first question is, could you explain why some cities that were not part of the nonprofit grid system of ERCOT didn't get affected? And the second question is, how can we prevent Texas from incentivizing too much in one area like alternative energy and have it be more balanced? And then I'll close it with saying that I think this is a blessing in disguise for Texas to not skip out on properly managing of the grid system and not to place one energy resource over another. It must be run as a partnership to maintain proper energy distribution. Sorry.
Good, thank you. Hopefully what the Representative Patterson just spoke about will answer the second question about trying to keep things balanced. But we have no role in providing incentives. What we tell generators is what we want from them. Okay, we say, as I said earlier, if we need a generator to be able to move quick, we may buy some generation that can move quick and pay them more. But we don't provide other just flat incentives for any type of resource in the state. To the first part of your question, I'm not sure I understand it. You said,
So
why are some cities?
Yeah, so why were some of the cities who were not on your nonprofit grid system, like ERCOT, they didn't get affected as much of the storm? They were able to shift, and it seemed like they were able to properly manage your system by, number one, being properly winterizing, having proper stockpile on hand, and understanding that the three system of having the three backup system, like your coal, your natural gas, and your alternative energy. When you're only having a backup plan falling on heavily on, let's say, your alternative energy, and you're skipping out on making sure the coal or natural gas or fuel isn't managed as properly and looked at properly, such as wind and energy. It just seems like it should be better. All three should work better as a partner for the backup plan.
Good, so thank you. So first part of it, I think, was why are some cities that aren't part of our nonprofit, I think you mean the nonprofit of ERCOT.
Right.
Cities that aren't the part of ERCOT managed it better. So SPP to our north, MISO to our east, both of them had problems, but nothing like ERCOT. Okay? They had better weatherized plants than we did. They stayed online, didn't have as many outages as what we had. Their wind turbines didn't freeze up because they didn't have freezing rain up north. They just had it starting in the panhandle. So there are a number of reasons why they didn't have the same problems we do or the severity, but each of them had load shedding. Each of them had to force some customers to go off to keep the system in balance. Just nowhere near what we had to do. To your point about how we make sure that we're treating all generators fairly, right? That we're making sure there's enough revenue for coal generation to be around, enough revenue for gas generation. We are looking at the market design today. When I say we, I mean the Public Utility Commission and ERCOT are looking at the market design today. It is the Public Utility Commission's decision-making authority of what changes to make. But they are focused on that very issue. They are very focused on how we make sure, and they use the term dispatchable generation. Generation that we can tell to go up and down, so that would be excluding wind and solar. How do they maintain dispatchable generation? And not only retain it, but make sure that there's more investment coming. That's what they're working on today.
Thank you.
Question?
So I wanted to start with just some background information, so you know where I'm coming from. My parents grew up in the Great Depression, and they taught me also to be very observant and to be self-reliant, because they didn't have anybody to rescue them during that time. And my father was also in the oil and gas business, and he would always be going to Washington to fight with the Federal Power Commission and a bunch of other federal agencies. And he said, no matter what you do, you're always wrong, and you cannot depend on the feds to help you out. So I learned from that lesson that I need to be able to take care of myself, no matter what the feds do, no matter what you do, no matter what my neighbor does. My neighbor had solar power, his power went out the first day. So I was lucky, I managed to survive a little longer, because when I built my home, I insulated all of my interior walls. I made sure that I had both gas and electric available to me. So I had a gas fireplace and a gas stove. And I had laid in a whole cord of wood for the winter. I lasted 2 days out of the 5 that I had no electricity. So, being self-reliant didn't quite work enough, so I'm trying to figure out where can I put a propane tank, but it won't fit on the little tiny piece of land I have. However, I am going to do that with my property in New Mexico, because the gas went out there and the electricity at the same time, and there was no power. That was not a good thing. So, anyway, what can we do to become more self-reliant ourselves, and what can you do to educate us on how we need to do that, so we don't have to be vulnerable to anybody?
So I had the question earlier. it was when I was in College Station this morning, I had a question, they said, no, I'm here, Andy's you, Bob. And the question was, should I get a generator for my home? A lot of folks have done that in the Houston area. Right now, I'm way off the reservation here, I'm not talking about, ERCOT now, but you asked a question of how we can get prepared, right? So, a lot of folks have bought generators for their homes. I think it gives you a great feeling to have that security. I don't think there's an economic justification for that. Okay? If you were out, I think you said you were out 3 days, or how many days were you out?
I was out 5 days.
You were out 5 days. So 5 days, the generator would cost you about $2,000 a day. Now, for some of us in the room, we'd say, well, I spent $10,000 in repairs, so maybe that makes sense for you to have done. But for most of us, the cost of going to a hotel, getting away from your home, the cost of the repairs to your home are probably gonna be less than $10,000. So you would say, all right, well, we've had one of these events in 2021, we had one in 2011, we had one in 1989. These are outage events. So if you use that standard, you'd say, well, it probably doesn't make sense to put a generator on that property. But now if you have a lot of local distribution problems, a lot of trees in your neighborhood, and you're losing power there, then again, it might. So doing that math is I don't think you could do an economic decision on that. I think it has to be how you feel, right? How, you're a safety person, right? I wanna make sure that you wanna make sure you're self-resilient, which is how I think most Texans are. And so that may be a choice for you. Certainly, the choice is improving your insulation on your home, making sure it's as energy efficient as possible, having alternate gas supplies, maybe an extra tank of propane. It could be those kinds of things. I'm just throwing out ideas right now. I didn't lose power, right? Now, if I was working for ERCOT, the first thing I would have done is I would have gone out and flipped off the main breaker on the house, because I would not have house power when everybody else was out. But I wasn't working for ERCOT at the time. And what did we do? Our main problem is we lost water, and we lost it for about a week. And so we hauled ourselves down to the community pool, and we had to, dip water into a trash can and use that for flushing toilets and that kind of thing. So I don't know how best to respond to you, but I would say make the choices that will make you feel safe. It may not be an economic choice, but make the choices that make you feel safe. That's, I think, the best time.
We need
Thank
more
you for your
information
comments.
on that.
Good. What was it? So you're ready as well. And I'm sure there's resources out there. Maybe somebody from the city council here can put her in touch with resources on how she can save energy and how she can get prepared. Sure. Thank you. So ma'am, excuse me ma'am, if you'll come down later, we'll talk to you, we'll put you in touch with the city council and they can get your name and get in touch with you. Yes?
Hi, my name is Anush. I have 10 big questions for you. No, I'm just kidding. I don't want to take too much of your time. Thank you so much for doing this. I just have one question. I think you touched a little bit on this already. It's about communication. What we did or did not do well in February, and are we doing anything differently if something else happens next year? That's all.
So what we didn't do well?
Yeah, your opinion on, do you think the communication was done well, especially for to the residents and the consumers, to prepare in advance or to expect the worst? Nobody expected this, yes, but can we do something differently? Are we doing anything differently if something happens?
Yes, so we do a lot of things differently. So to start with, well, let's address communications first. So we're trying to make sure that all the people that are communicating in public are in sync. So we run several tests, several exercises to make sure that they're all talking to each other. We are collaborating more than we ever have with that group. What happened last time is there was a lack of enough communication coming out. And because of that lack of communication coming out, there were different stories that began to be created. So again, I was sitting in my home and I heard about all the outages in the city of Austin. And so I called up a friend who used to be a executive at the city of Austin, and I said, how is it that we're not rotating customers? Why are so many customers being out for so long? And the answer was exactly what I told you earlier. They ran out. They didn't have any more customers that they could rotate. So they just flat ran out. I had never even imagined that would be a possibility. And so because many people hadn't imagined that as a possibility, a lot of folks created their own story around what was happening. And those stories then got confused because some were correct and some weren't correct, but they were each going different directions and pointing in different places. That's what we have to improve. We have to get better on communication. But let's get beyond that. Beyond communication, we're operating in a much more reliable manner than we have ever in the past. Why are we just now doing that? Why didn't we do that always? Remember I talked about RACE and CARE? It's because of that. Because when ERCOT steps in the middle and says, we're gonna bring more reliability, it means prices go down. And that's bad for those generators. The same ones we're trying to figure out how to keep in the market, they're bad, that's bad for them. So ERCOT always stepped back, and as my head of operations said, we got very comfortable stepping right to the edge of a 30-foot cliff and looking down. We just did that all the time. We knew how that worked. Now, we're 5 feet back. Now, it makes some people mad because it costs more to the market and it takes some revenues away from some generators. But we're standing 5 feet back. We're bringing more reserves online. When we think there's an uncertain weather forecast, let me give you a sense of that. This summer, we had a weather front coming through Dallas, middle of summer, supposed to rain on Dallas at 2 p.m., right as our peak was hitting. So with that rain in Dallas, we expected a drop of 3,000 megawatts of load. And behind it, because it had run through the panhandle, we expected wind generation to pick up by 3,000 megawatts. 6,000 megawatt net. If we were wrong by even half an hour, we were short 6,000 megawatts. So what do? Never before had we done this, but we began to buy more generation to be available to us in case we missed it by half an hour. Now, thankfully, we didn't need it. And some people would say, well, then you overbought. You shouldn't have bought that. But we're being more conservative than we have been in the past. That's one of the major changes that we've made. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Hey, Brad, we've got about 5 more minutes.
Okay. All right. 3 people. Let's talk quick.
Okay, I've got 2 questions, and they're very.
Can you make it one?
It's 2 different things. So
okay.
One is how do the consumers get protected when there are costs that have to be passed on to us? Because the news, obviously, I don't believe a lot of the news, but during the disaster in February, people were getting bills the next month that were outrageous. They were talking in the thousands of dollars. So I wanted to know what prevents, or what places things are in there to prevent that from happening again or happening, period. That's my first question. And the second question, you've talked about generation and you've talked about consumption. What about all the transmission lines that are everywhere? What's being done there? Because you had mentioned that during the winter storm, you had transformers blown out because of the way consumption was compared to the generating power you had. What's being done to take care of the grid as far as the transmission lines?
Thank you. I've got both. And you correct me if I get off track. But the first one, what's being done to protect customers? The vast majority of customers are on fixed rates. Right? It's not just co-serve, it's not just Denton, but competitive customers in the competitive electricity market, the vast majority have fixed rates. There's about 9 million total customers in the state of Texas. Roughly about 60,000 of those customers were on variable rates. Those are the ones that got hurt. Everyone else, their retailer absorbed the hit. So if the retailer sold you power for 8 cents, after the storm, it was still 8 cents. It was still 8 cents the next month. Right? They absorbed that cost. But those customers that went on a variable rate got hit. So the PUC and the legislature got involved, but I know, I forget who actually made the final decision, but the PUC, I believe, made the final decision to not allow residential customers to have a variable rate. Now, I think that's a big loss for the system. Because if customers are actually knowledgeable, we want to see prices go up and to adjust the thermostats down. So we want them to be reactive and to help us by seeing that price change. But because the PUC recognized that enough of that 60,000 didn't know what they were signing when they signed that contract and ended up paying large bills, they said that we'll have no more of that. So that is one of the protections in place, that service cannot be offered now. Transmission. So transmission, our state, and when I talk about transformers, I was talking about the distribution level transformers, not transmission. So transmission, big stuff, big towers. Distribution, the small towers or small poles outside your house, okay? From a transmission perspective, we in Texas have built more transmission, I believe, than any other region of the country. So coming out of New York, one of the first things I wanted to do, sorry, this is a long answer, this is over 2 minutes. You got a little bit more time? We got one more question after this. When I got to New York, they had not built transmission in 30 years. On average, we invest, the state, I should say it again, the companies that own transmission, invest more than $1 billion a year in transmission in the state. We have an extraordinarily strong transmission grid. There are areas that we have to improve it. There's always going to be that. We have to improve it in the Rio Grande Valley. We have to improve it along our Gulf Coast because we are subject to hurricanes, so we have to improve our transmission along there. But we have invested, and in New York, they had not built a single transmission line in 30 years. It's unfathomable, isn't it? It's crazy. Now, when I got there, we built 2 in my 3 years. But the reason why was because they were wanting to bring in a lot of wind power from up in the northern part of the state, and that had to get down to the southern part of the state. It was very controversial, but we built 2 major transmission lines. Sorry, I should have this up here. We built 2 major transmission lines, but Texas has never suffered from that. Yes, sir.
I'll be
2 for
brief, because I know it moved around.
There you go.
It looks to me like you're getting a lot of pressure to put the renewable resources in your system. And that's probably going to have less reliability and more difficulty in running your system. So are there some things you can do locally with the state government, for example? If you are wanting to bring a solar or a wind farm, you have to contribute to the reserve fund. So that then maybe you can take some of that subsidy that the wind and solar is getting and distribute it to the gas producers by having a fund where the unreliable ones have to pay in for some of the backup reserve that's required. That's just
Good, thank you, Bill. So a lot of the ideas Bill was just discussing about how we can maybe move some money from those renewables back to the other generators to help their financial situation. There's a lot of ideas. All those ideas are out there. The Public Utility Commission is looking at that now. They plan to have a straw man, what do they call it, on the 16th. They plan to have their plan out on December 16th of what they want to do. This is the PUC concept. I would say I'm slightly out of sync because I believe that we can have the solar and wind come to our market and make sure that we keep those other generators that we need to balance them. I think we can do both. So my idea is not to stop those renewables from coming because I think there's a lot of value to them. My idea is to make sure that as they come, we're retaining the stuff that we need to keep the system safe and secure. So I want to be able to do both. But there's a lot of people on all sides of that equation. Thank you.
All right, let's give a hand to Mr.
We said we'd stay to the end, and we met it. So thank you all very much. Just know that this is a continuing work in progress, obviously, as the state addresses the grid and all our utility needs. But thank you so much. We'll stick around for a little while if any other one-on-one questions that you have. I do want to, Lindsay, wave at everybody. So Lindsay is the, I guess, government relations, communications head for ERCOT. She unfortunately has to work with the legislators. But she's going to stick around as well. She'll give you her business card. card, so if there's any other kind of follow-up questions, concerns or what have you, she's available, she can give you her business card. Thank y'all so much and have a blessed evening.
Hey, how's it going, man?
Doing all right, sir?
Yeah, doing good. How about you? Appreciate you talking.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Of course.
We'll be getting,
Okay.